Maki Zenin, a non-sorcerer from the Zenin family with no cursed energy due to her heavenly restriction, versus Rock Lee, a shinobi incapable of utilizing ninjutsu or genjutsu, but with training from Might Guy, is able to become one of the best taijutsu users in Naruto. Because of their similarities within their respective verses, there is obviously bound to be comparisons drawn between the two, and one of those comparisons is who would win in a fully fledged out fight. We will obviously be using post-awakening Maki, and more specifically Maki in her current state in the manga, and Tempest will be using Rock Lee from mainly Shippuden, as using Adult Lee can get pretty ridiculous, and it's a little weird to actually scale him. We'll start with Rock Lee since his scaling has a lot more to it since his feats span over Part 1 and Shippuden.
Rock Lee during the Chunin exams in Chapter 51 to Chapter 53 is able to fight against Dosu in the Sound 4. In the same fight, Rock Lee is not only able to fight on par with that of Dosu, but even at one point, although brief, is able to react to Dosu's attack that uses sound. It's verbatim stated by Dosu himself that it moves at supersonic speeds, supersonic by definition being a speed that is faster or transcends that of the speed of sound, meaning anywhere from Mach 1, Mach 2, or above. Lee during his fight against Gaara would then be at a low ball 2 times faster than he was previously, as when he removes his weights, he's not only able to speed blitz, but nearly perception blitz that of Gaara. This is actually reinforced prior within the series within Chapter 37 and Lee's fight against Sasuke. It's stated by Lee that even though you're fast enough to perceive movements, that doesn't necessarily mean that you could physically react to it. Lee would then unlock that of the 8 gates, which are stated to be dozens upon dozens of times of an amp by Might Guy, someone who has at least been training for 15 to 16 years by this point in time in taijutsu. Dozens by definition is anywhere from 12 to 24 times his prior Mach 4. We know this to be the case because Lee by this time is at least Mach 4, seeing how in base he's at least relative to sound. He then takes off his weights and is able to perception blitz Gaara, which is at least 2 times the aforementioned Mach 4, and then he finally unlocks the 8 inner gates as well. If you want to take the low ball gates interpretation and take the multiple of 12 instead of 24, then that would mean that a 5th gate Lee is at least Mach 24. Granted, if you take Mai's bullet calc at face value and Maki reacting to said aforementioned bullet, Maki would be faster than that of the calc, and it's anywhere from Mach 24 to Mach 26. However, if you take the high ball 24 times amp the gates give to Lee, that would mean that Lee in the 5th gate would be at least Mach 48, and it would outclass that of Maki pretty blatantly. If you want to give Maki the benefit of the doubt and say that she's somehow as fast as Kashimo's lightning, and it has direct scaling to 15 finger Sukuna, and if you think that 15 finger Sukuna is over Kashimo, which I'll leave up to your interpretation, then it should be in the higher echelons of supersonic speeds, and massively speed blitz that of the 5th gate Lee, at least within his Part 1 Chunin exams forms, as when we get into Shippuden, it gets pretty bad for Maki yet again.
Maki in Goodwill event should massively upscale from her destructive power of Mechamaru's Blast, which is capable of obliterating an entire city block, and this is kind of one of her more on the low type of feats. At a certain time within the manga, we see Toji absolutely mop the floor with Dagon. This Dagon just previous to this was shown creating an entire island using his domain expansion, which should be very self-explanatory, and it gets him to pretty much island level by this point. And this is pretty much just ignoring the amount of water that is present within the domain, plus you can't really say Dagon doesn't scale to it since this is his own cursed energy that he's using to make his domain, so saying that he wouldn't scale to it is pretty ridiculous. And as we know, Maki is equal to Toji, and that same Toji just embarrassed Dagon, so this is a pretty way of getting Maki to this level of AP. The narrative implies that the majority of the verse operates at speeds below supersonic levels. This is evident as Choso's piercing blood is described as being as fast as sound, and even Yuji from the Shibuya arc admits that he only has a 50-50% shot at actually dodging it, despite successfully dodging it most of the time. On the other hand, it's stated by the narrator that Naoya surpasses subsonic speeds. This is in line with the fact that he couldn't easily evade Choso's piercing blood, and Maki claims that he even exceeds the speed of sound. In his vengeful spirit state, Naoya is said to have reached a speed of Mach 3, which is where most of the Jujutsu Kaisen caps at Mach 3 claims mostly come from. However, what people mostly don't take into account is the fact that this is a pre-awakening Maki, or pre-true self Maki, which is basically Maki without her full potential unlocked, which we know after this awakening she becomes equal to Toji, as I mentioned earlier in the video. With this awakening, she is implied to have been on a similar level to someone like Yuta and Hikari, and are once again implied to be kind of like the top 3 Jujutsu High students, And they're apparently close enough that if Gojo does indeed lose to Sukuna, their best shot at actually winning against him is just sending them in immediately after Gojo loses. The reason this is important is because of the fact that she would scale to things like Hikari's feat of dodging lightning. This feat has a calc that is upwards of Mach 4760 or massively hypersonic plus speeds. Now this isn't terribly inconsistent with the rest of the series because of what I mentioned earlier about top tiers within the verse pretty much just being relative and having that sense of scaling to every speed feat within the series. So this isn't completely out of the water, right? And regarding Maki's special abilities, she possesses a replica of Toji's sword that enables her to sever her opponent's soul. Moreover, she has the capacity to adapt to unfamiliar fighting styles and exhibits mastery over various weapons. Which, yes, I'm going to be giving Maki her weapons for this. I know there are ways to actually get Maki to things like FTL, and that's mostly if we kind of highball the interpretation of Gojo's Hollow Purple being imaginary mass, and we have Hanami actually dodging said imaginary mass. And apparently imaginary mass is just supposed to move at faster than light speeds. However, this can kind of be debunked if you consider things like Toji just getting absolutely like torso. So I don't think faster than light scaling is necessarily consistent, but it's there. And at the time of this recording, Maki should just not be able to survive Hollow Purple at all. If Gojo sent a Hollow Purple at her, she would probably get turned into the fucking Apple logo, just like Toji.
We know that a base Lee is able to react to that of Haku, who's moving out of his ice mirrors whilst weakened, but however bloodlusted, meaning at the very least he should be as strong as within his Part 1 Land of Waves iteration that intercepted a weakened Kakashi's Raikiri. The reason this is impressive is because we know that Kakashi's Raikiri was famed for being able to cut a lightning bolt in half whilst being fatigued, an even younger iteration than that of his Land of Waves iteration. Keep in mind, this Lee is also in base and fatigued as I said prior, and not even using that of the gates. Meaning base to base, the Maki and Lee should at least be relative, with Lee having the slight edge over Maki. When he taps into the gates, he should be able to speed blitz once again, and when you get into multipliers, Lee should easily get within the light speed and even faster than light speeds and perception blitz that of Maki, like he did to Gaara. I think me and Toaster both agree that Maki could maybe beat Lee in a high diff battle within his Part 1 iteration, and even then that might be debatable. I also wanted to bring notice that Lee was able to throw a kunai between 8-Kit's Guy and that of Ten Tails Madara before they can reach contact, which is a movement and reaction feat almost no other can replicate, as I said prior, and Maki is pretty much outclassed in terms of hacks and abilities, as even Maki is more prevalent in Kenjutsu rather than hand-to-hand combat or Taijutsu like Lee, and Lee's Taijutsu would overpower her Kenjutsu and her own Taijutsu due to the difference in speed and precision. However, with that being said, I want to say thank you to that of Toaster for collaborating with me again, and to make sure you guys subscribe to myself and Toaster. Make sure to like the video, and till next time, bye.